this is our first talk for this 2018 convention, and it's part of a topic that's it's both fascinating, very interesting, but it can also be most of the time very frustrating because there is not much clear documentation from the period that allows you to really pinpoint and identify 100% some of the issues or some of the countermarks. But thankfully, I think that for the Provisional de Valladolid issues, as I will show you, the attribution now is pretty much definitive, and we will see what's the correct sequence of the issues is, and explain also a couple of validation operations that did take place in that city between 1813 and 1814, which are the years during which this coinage was issued. So, first, one small precision. As you read in the title, it's Provisional Royalist silver coinage. And this is just to make sure we're not going to deal this time with a very mysterious, probably counterfeit, but I don't think it has been studied enough, which is basically a uniface ingot with PV and 8R initials. It was plated in Prideaux long ago, so it's old enough. I think it's bogus, but Prideaux, in his 1938 book, calls it possibly or probably genuine. So, but that requires, it's another different topic. And if that ingot is good, it was issued by the insurgents, so it does not belong in this talk. So, first, some information about the locale. So, Valladolid de Michoacán, which is Morelia currently in Mexico, was centrally located in Mexico, and it was also a fairly important city. From the numismatic point of view, that can be verified pretty easily because the city issued several proclamation medals for the kings. And usually you have a very strict correlation between importance of a town and the amount of medals of this kind they issued. So here we see the Charles III, 1760, and a 1791 Charles IV, just for illustration purposes. It was centrally located because this is Mexico, and this is the Intendencia de Valladolid. Valladolid is roughly here, very central, and so very important as a strategic locale during a conflict, which would happen during the War for Independence period. So let's take a quick look on the historical events on the period. So Valladolid played an important role during the War for Independence conflict. Of course, the War for Independence started in 1810, and in late September 1810, Valladolid fell to the insurgents of Miguel Hidalgo, and he stayed there for roughly 3.5 weeks, after which he left the city, and very soon afterwards he came back under royalist control. Let's take a look at the coins now. We're talking about, it's only one denomination, silver 8 reals, all dated 1813, and they can be divided in 3 major types. My designation for them is very basic, but I think it also helps for the clarity to identify them. So the first one I call the blank variety, It's undated, but as we will see, it was issued in 1813. It's unlisted in KM, but it's listed in Calico, and that's the number in Calico, Numismática Española. The spelled out variety has the Provisional de Valladolid's legend spelled out in three lines. It's KM 178 and it's Calico 670. Interestingly, you will see Calico puts, and afterwards, the drape bust variety, also dated 1813, which has a drape bust of Ferdinand VII. Interestingly, Calico puts the drape bust variety before the spelled out and before the blank variety. So we could infer that for him, this was the correct sequence of issuance, or at least that the drape bust came before the spelled out, and maybe he added the blank variety because it was discovered much later.
Is there a Calico 671?
Calico 671 is a spelled out variety with an insurgent countermark and also a PDV and F7 stamps. So it's roughly the same general type, but it's different variety. Yeah. So we have varieties and they include countermarks. All the countermarks are always two stamps. One is both rectangular, usually found on opposite sides of the coin. One reads F7, which is obviously Ferdinand VII, and PDV, as we will see, stands for Provisional de Valladolid. So those are the coins. So this is the blank planchet type. This is the spelled out variety. Here we don't see it very well. This is Calico 671. It's unique. And you see Provisional de Valladolid, 1813. Coat of arms, simple, MO.
What year is that?
1813. They're all 1813. Siempre tienen la fecha 13. So, this is the drape bust type, ex Gerber. And this coin has a long pedigree from 1920, roughly, passed to Jacques Schulman. Jacques Schulman lended the pictures to Prideaux for his 1938 book, but eventually the coin was acquired by Prideaux at some point because it's in the 1971 Superior auction. And in that year, it realized $15,000, which was a lot of money. So basically, everybody agrees that these are extremely rare coins. Elizondo calls it extremely rare. Calbeto is 3 Rs. This is KM, standard catalog of word coins, just say rare. As we see here, no prices, it's, this is for the spelled out variety. Basically, no auction appearance since 1971. There was a coin in the Tony Caram auction, but it was counterfeit, like sold by Long. Maybe, when was the Caram auction? 97 maybe? So basically 20 years ago. So, and everybody agrees that they're rare, but almost none of the authors give like what I like to call hard information, precise, how many were struck, stuff like that. Obviously, the spelled out type is immediately attributable because it spells Provisional de Valladolid, so that's easy. Medina found a document that 877 marks of silver. A mark was roughly 8 coins of 8 reals. So this is about, say, 6,500 pesos were minted in that period. That's all we know. This is an image of Medina's las monedas obsidianales. So it's very compact, very little information available.
Carlos, what was the source document that Medina used to come up with those numbers?
He says it was in the Archivo de Indias. So this was probably an accounting document that's spelled because, as we will see, the intendant or governor of Valladolid requested silver to make these, and he had to give like IOUs or a receipt basically. So he found a copy of that, and Medina also found there was because for the Spanish authorities in the main peninsula, everything that went on during the War for Independence conflict was new. So this phenomenon of several provisional mints was studied fairly in depth. So there's a document dated 1817, which is a guy basically that was in Mexico at the time and writes about the economic consequences for all the viceroyalty of all these mints. And he mentions that Provisional de Valladolid issued coinage. So Medina basically proved that there was a mint that issued provisional coins, and we know the amount issued for that short period, which is not much, but it's something.
And we don't know which of the three coins that represents.
We will in 15 minutes. This is a small article or note by Perdoe. This was published in the Bulletin of the Puebla Numismatic Society in 1962. I think, so this is the discovery piece for the draped bust type. So it probably surfaced in around 1960, I guess. And it probably surfaced either in the US or locally in Mexico, because you can't find any reference to it in like European catalogs or anything. So basically, Perdoe says, Perdoe, of course, knew about the Provisional de Valladolid spelled out varieties because he plated 2 specimens. And he probably owned one of these by around 1962 already. But this was a new coin to him. And he states that it has to be it's very doubtful that the draped bust was struck in Valladolid. He didn't believe that Valladolid could strike this fairly close imitation of the regular draped bust Mexico type, because to him it was not conceivable, in particular, that Valladolid, the provisional mint, had sufficiently good edge milling device. And he says, what do the initials MO stand for? He didn't know. Maybe the engraver, maybe the assayer, but he says, I've searched in vain and I have not found anything. So this is taken from the 1971 Perdoe sale in Superior. And this is just to illustrate what was the knowledge at the time. And this knowledge basically did not evolve for 30, 35 years, because this description, after it was published here, you find it in Calico, you find it in KM, and you find it basically in every book that lists this coinage. And they stated that that this coinage was struck in 1813 when the city was under siege. That's correct, more or less. When the coins fell into the besiegers' hands, they counterstamped them with the seal of the Suprema Junta, which is this stamp. And when these coins were recovered by the besieged armies, a new countermark was added, PDV. It's very convoluted. And also, there's an F7 stamp underneath the eagle stamp. So it doesn't make any logic, actually, but this description or theory, attribution, whatever you want to call it, was accepted for roughly 40 years. Oh, sorry. So let's focus now on what historical information we were able to find for this. There's absolute certain evidence that there was a very, very severe lack of circulating media in Valladolid at the end of 1812. And this was the final consequence of a whole series of events piling up one after the other. There were considerable contributions made by the city between 1779 and 1809, and in particular between 1804 and 1808, when the Consolidación de Vales Reales took place. So basically, 1 million pesos was given to Spain, taken out of Valladolid for those 5 years, in those 5 years. After the conflict, the War for Independence erupted, a lot of foreigners, wealthy merchants, just migrated and just flew away from the conflict area. That took away also some riches. And if we recall, the city was occupied by the insurgents for roughly a month in late 1810. Of course, they took everything they found. That added more. And to top it all, there's a document I found that talks about the abuse of authority by the royalist military that took back the city between 1811 and 1812. That meant that they basically confiscated whatever they found, and you couldn't say anything because they were the guys with the weapons, right? So, in 1811, because there was so few circulating media in the area, Valladolid officially authorized the Zacatecas LVO type to circulate there. But in 1812, there was a local ordinance that said it's not good anymore. So that meant that all those LVO coins that were in the area went to some other places where they would be better received. So this created a real lack of circulating media for the Valladolid area. And that's the Provisional Zacatecas. So the logical step for the local authorities was to authorize and issue their own coinage. And this is what happened. This is the ordinance of March 11, 1813, which authorizes the Provisional de Valladolid coinage. It's very interesting. We're going to analyze it in detail, but it mentions the PDV and the F7 stamps. It mentions the legend, Provisional de Valladolid 1813, and it mentions also, as we will see, essentially all the design. So basically, this was an official ordinance signed by the governor of the area, basically. First, the ordinance described the original projected type. So originally, the city wanted to issue the spelled out type, Provisional de Valladolid. They said it would be struck, not cast, because that was better quality. It would read Provisional de Valladolid. On the obverse, the reverse would be a simplified coat of arms of Spain and the city. And crucially, it had a milled edge design and border device. This was very important because the authorities saw that the first provisional issues that they had seen in circulation lacked this border edge, and that caused clipping and people rejecting it. So this was very important to them, and they built a milled edge device, basically. However, what happened is that just before the operation started, the coin press broke down. But the milled edge device was still good. So they decided to strike until the coin press is repaired, and the original design can be issued, we're going to issue blank planchettes with a milled edge design and 2 countermarks. This is all stated clearly in the ordinance. So, and it even says this initials, F7, which stands for Fernando 7, and PDV stands for Provisional de Valladolid. So it's all good. If we go back, this coin has an edge design, by the way, we can see it there. So this is the first issue. Okay, so up to this point, we know that the blank planchette with the F7 and PDV stamps are the first issue because they have a milled edge design. Further information from the period, we know, and also we can infer that at some point they must have repaired the coin press. So they issued first the blanks and then the normally spelled out design. However, why did they issue a draped bust design in 1813? This is the what we will see now. Even though the city successfully issued a small amount of 8 real coins, there were still, despite they were officially not accepted, a lot of provisional issue coins in circulation in the area. So it caused, and most of these provisional issues were brought in by royalist commanders who were just stopping in the city to replenish resources and then go back. Basically, you could not refuse the coin they brought in. But a case in point, in February 1814, this guy, Pedro Negrete, brought with him and his troops coins of Zacatecas, probably the provisional bust design, because those were debased, Durango, and Sombrerete, and the population rejected them. So there was still, in early 1814, so roughly a year after those first 2 issues were issued, a pressing need to regulate and withdraw the provisional coinage that was circulating in the area. In around July 1814, the governor or intendant Manuel Merino collects all available coinage that was found in the area, struck in Mexico City because everybody knew those coins were good, and he planned to assemble or collect roughly 60,000 pesos. So that was the amount of circulating media and provisional issues at the time. He only was able to collect 30,000 pesos. And this is most important, he writes in a letter that it was decided to reduce all provisional coins circulated in the city to a single uniform and local type, despite the losses from the smelting and refining, the Zacatecas, Guanajuato issues that were not to the correct weight or fineness. And he also mentions that the one that was minted in the city showing lightweight. So some of the coins that were issued by Valladolid in 1813 may be lightweight. So say if we find a coin that weighs a gram less, it shouldn't be a deterrent for authenticity. And he says, adopting measures to deface the counterfeit, cast and debased ones, and that both the restruck ones and those that were acceptable would be marked with a stamp or sign difficult to imitate to certify them. So you can find 8 reales, say from the spelled out type probably, with countermarks. That could be well because say we found a spelled out type that was acceptable in weight, they would have to mark them with a stamp or sign difficult to imitate. So we know that in mid-1814, the local authorities decided to collect, melt, and reissue, either overstrike or melt, altogether melt and strike them, all the provisional coins that they could collect. The only thing we don't know at this point is what was the design of the single uniform and local type. Could it be the drape bust, or maybe they used the spelled out type? This is what we're going to find now. And this is very interesting information, but it was found in a very odd place. In 1815, a big counterfeiting operation took place in Valladolid. Roughly what happened is, after the mint stopped issuing coins in late 1813, they stored all the equipment in a very poorly guarded locale. And this Vicente Carranza was friends with the lady that was in charge, the gatekeeper. So this guy started buying all the debased planchettes, provisional coins he could find, and had her open the doors, struck coins, and it was a scandal. So he used mostly copper or debased planchettes. However, due to the crisis in the area, and unusually enough, the members of the counterfeit bank were not hung. Their lives were spared, although they were punished. And this is the crucial bit of information that we needed. So there was a big trial, everybody testified, and the treasurer of the Provisional Mint said that when the mint, in 1814, it was necessary to work at the mint for most of the time, so most of the days, to add the royal bust and coat of arms to the pesos that were initially minted with only 2 stamps of initial letters, which were several thousand. So this allows us to know that they struck several thousand of the blank planchettes, and that the overstruck coins had the royal bust and the coat of arms. So this is the drape bust type. So the uniform local type that they use to regulate and smelt and reissue all the coins that were circulating in the area has the drape bust design. And this is very much in line with the rarity of the coins, because the blank planches are extremely rare, perhaps too known. The spelled out variety is the same thing, too known. And the bust is very rare, but there may be 5 or 6 of them. So it makes sense. So now we can reattribute the series. So of course this is the first issue. It was struck for that period, and they roughly struck I think 400 marks of them, so that's 3,208 reals, very low. The spelled out, this is a beautiful coin, by the way, probably, and then the finest known, has a long pedigree starting 1909, Adolf Hess, then went to Jacques Schulman, played it in Bordeaux, played it everywhere basically. It's a calico plate coin, it's played it in Dassy, it's played it everywhere. So this type was struck for that period, and that period is the period that Medina mentioned, that they struck 877 marks, so we know the mintage figures for this type as well, which is roughly 6,500 coins. This is the most important and interesting coin. This is a drape bust, and we can see PDV here, and F7. Initially, when I saw this coin only in pictures, I thought the PDV and the F7 would countermark over it, but now I think this was one of the overstruck issues over the blank planchets. This is also a very interesting coin. This was sold recently in Europe. You can see it has been tested, so it's good silver because it wasn't melted. And you can see traces of an undertype. So this was probably, or possibly, one of the coins that were overstruck over another provisional issue. But I would have to see the coin in hand to see what the undertype could be. And that pretty much ends the talk. So any questions?
How come there are so few coins surviving of these meetings?
The amounts struck were very low. 3,200 or 6,400 coins is ridiculously low for the period. Like Zacatecas struck, I don't recall exactly, but 1811 was like 1.5 million pesos. This is 6,400 pesos. It's very tiny. And after 1815, this issue was not legally accepted anymore because none of these coins in particular have an assayer initial, so nobody wanted them. So you would expect that tiny issue, most melted, should be extremely rare, and it is.
So when they recall, for example, 30,000 pesos, it means that they should replace these with something.
Yes,
So what they use to replace that?
the Drake
Not
bust.
coins?
The Drake bust.
Okay.
The Drake bust. So the Drake bust usually was issued in 30,000. The blank planchet is roughly less than 4,000. The spelled out 6,500, and the Drake bust 30,000. So you would expect that it's not always like that, but you would expect that maybe you have one Drake bust per each spelled out, 4 Drake bust coins per each spelled out coin out there, survivors. Yes?
Carlos, you might mention that the two inscription types, one of them appears to have been struck over the blank type. It shows clearly the countermarks underneath. So they're taking these out of circulation effectively in 2 different times, overstriking them twice.
Probably.
Again, creating rarity.
Yeah. Although it can also be now, maybe, I haven't seen the coin in hand, that if we recall the operation in 1814, they said that those that were good enough, you would only have to stamp to certify them. So maybe.
The problem with that theory, though, is there's a Supreme Junta counterstamp over the top.
Yeah.
And it's unlikely those were used.
After 1814?
Correct.
Okay, so that makes sense. So yeah, you're right. Yes.
Where was the last auction with this type of coins?
This was this year, recently. This was sold in Spain, Cayón.
Cayón in March, I believe.
Yeah. Yes.
Do we have weights reported for these specimens?
Good question. They're roughly around 26 something. You rarely see overweight, but then again, they're so rare that you can't see a statistical pattern from like a sample of 2-3 coins. I think it's irrelevant, but more importantly, the documentation mentions that some of the early issues were underweight. So you can expect some lack of weight there.
Regarding the edge milling, how similar is it to the edges that we see on other provisional rolls?
The blank planchet is a good imitation, not 100% accurate, but it's fairly good. It's basically what you could expect from, I don't know, it's not the most intelligent comparison, but from a high quality contemporary counterfeit of the period, that's the workmanship standard. The spelled out variety I've only had one coin in hand, and it's the edge is very well made, and the drape bust is okay too.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.